Hi and welcome back to another video of JPlay. I am Marcus and yet again I'm doing another top 10 video, and today it's all about games that are somewhat flying under the radar, have been forgotten, or maybe a little bit obscure, whatever this means. I recently joined a podcast, More Games Than Time. Actually, I will definitely leave a link to that podcast here. I think it's not yet live. And we were talking about obscure games and also games that are flying under the radar. I think I sidetracked the conversation a little bit because for whatever reason, I talked more about designers like Stefan Feld and Rainer Knizia, who are definitely typically not well known for games that are flying under the radar. But yes, I have one game by Stefan Feld on my list today. So I think with that being said, let's get started. The first game for today is Dark Horse. And yeah, I think published by Nightworks. It was a Kickstarter. I think it was 2 Kickstarters. I actually joined this game with a second Kickstarter, so the base game was already out, and then I was lucky enough getting myself a copy with all of the expansion with the second campaign here. I believe I did feature this on my channel because the game, I think with a solo mode, with a base game comes with a solo mode. Maybe there is even one more advanced one in the expansion rules. I really can't quite remember. Only thing I do remember is that the solo mode is more for training purposes than an actual challenge. But I really think this game shines at a, let's say, somewhat higher player ground. In this game, it's really a strange mix of dice placement, playing or building your rail network, harvesting resources, building cities and towns, using action card, event cards will be there. There is a lot of player interaction in this game, especially introduced by those action cards and also by the event cards. With the expansion, a ton of more stuff gets added, like bandits, I think Native Americans, and what you would expect in a Western themed game like this one here. The artwork, I think it's questionable. I really taught this game to a bunch of people, and a lot of those were, let's say, somewhat reluctant when they have I think they checked out some footage on BGG, for example, and then they said, oh, do you really want to play this game? The design looks rather dated and whatnot. But ultimately, I'm typically very successful. I'm convincing these people trying a game, so it seems I have some credibility in my community, and everyone liked it. That's really the key message. I'm a big fan of this game despite the artwork. The designer, I think he watched one video of my solo playthrough, mentioned there may be coming, or he's at least remotely thinking about having a deluxeified version of the game. So I could imagine that this game might do much better when, let's say, the artwork is being reconsidered. From a playing experience, it's really great. Again, I enjoy this game a big deal. I played it maybe 10, 12 times or so. Right now, I'm planning to do that more often now because, again, as I was going through my collection and thinking about, okay, what games are flying under the radar? Again, I stumbled upon Dark Horse. Was basically one of my first games. I noticed that I really need to play this game more often than I actually do. And yeah, that's pretty much the first game in my list. As usual, don't see it in any way of prioritization. So if this is not my last important game on my list, doesn't really matter. It's simply ranging amongst my top 10 games that I think are somewhat flying under the radar. And yeah, that's Dark Horse. Up next, we have Three Kingdoms Redux. I'm not really sure if this game is really flying under the radar because I think it has a lot of fans on the Geek. I would rather think of it as some kind of a myth because it seems it's not really published by a grand publishing house like Asmodee or so. And I think the two designers, Juster and Christina, they are basically running their show on their own. And they also reached out to me back then, asking me if I would be willing to do a, video of this game, which I did. So I think I did a 2-episode video more or less explaining the rules, not really a full playthrough here. And from a theme perspective, it plays in China during the time of the Three Kingdoms. You are taking over the role of one of those generals, and then you're trying to outsmart the other two opponents. What's very special about this game is that it's exactly a 3-player game. So like Churchill, for example, you really have to play this with 2 other friends. There were always discussions having, I don't know, a variant for 2 players or so. I really don't know where this ended up actually. But I really hold this game very dearly for what it is, a 3-player game. So if you really have a 3-player game and you're looking for a Euro-style kind of game with a lot of player interaction and a lot of theme in it, then really don't look any further than this. It has really some very cool mechanics in respect how those battles are being fought. There are some also very clever mechanics on how you're placing your workers. It's kind of you're placing your workers with a bidding mechanism, something I always like, having a bidding mechanism in a game. So you can really also outsmart your opponents here, depending on, basically how many bidding points you have. And it basically really comes with a lot of components in a relatively small box, and that's one of the problems. The components do not really fit into the box properly. I really have to press hard to keep the lid here closed basically. All of those generals, I think there's a ton of generals, and there's even a nice booklet where all of those are being explained. They all come with special abilities, which doesn't make the game necessarily easier, because you have to really pay a lot of attention to what your opponents have, where those generals are being placed. So it's not a very complicated game from a rules perspective. I think you can get behind that very easily, but it's a very complex game in respect to the decision. The timing is really key in this game, where you are placing some of your generals. Which general are you using? Are you sending these amount of troops with the general and whatnot? You have to feed your empire, your provinces and whatnot. So really a lot of things that you have to pay attention to in this game. It's also not the shortest game in the world, so I never ended a game below 3 hours, I would say, but maybe that's a little bit on me, suffering from an AP kind of thing, or maybe I'm playing with folks who are suffering from analysis paralysis, I don't know, but that's okay. It's really a full feature game for a normal length evening, I would say. Great theme out there, great mechanics, and this is really one of the things where I really hope that the designers will get the success they are deserving with Three Kingdoms Redux. And then there is the before mentioned Stefan Feld game, the Oracle of Delphi, or Delphi, I can't remember. I know typically you are thinking, hey, Stefan Feld, does he do underrated games? In my book, yes, because there was a time where he really designed a lot of things. With that being said, I don't think any of his games are really bad. For whatever reason, this game fell flat for a lot of folks. Also, a lot of folks I've spoken to personally. I really like this kind of game. It's a relatively simple racing game with a lot of replayability in respect how you are setting up the map. So there are a lot of things that you can do differently to get a new experience each time you're playing. Yes, the action will always be the same, and no, there is no narrative, there are no event cards in this game. It's a straight up Euro game in this case, where you're really traveling around the Greek seas here, trying to impress the gods and whatever, fighting mythic monsters. And also fighting sounds more thrilling than it actually is. But as there are dice in this game, yes, there is a lot of, not a lot, but there is some luck in this game. As usual with a Stefan Feld game, when he's introducing luck, you typically also get some ways to remediate those things or mitigate the luck factor in this game, and Delphi is no different here. And it's also, I think, a good mid-range game in respect to complexity, and also how complicated. It's really relatively straightforward to play. Personally, I introduced it also to a lot of folks who were also kind of reluctant to play that because maybe they did hear bad things, but usually when they played it, they liked it. I'm pretty sure it's not his greatest game out there. I think these are really games like Traian out there, Castles of Burgundy, Bora Bora, which are also covered on one of my other top 10 games, but it's really a great game, and for whatever reasons was flying under the radar. So this is one of those things which I personally, I think, would never trade away, because every now and then I really look at it in my shelf and I say, hey, let's play Delphi again. I mean, was really great, and you have this kind of, it's a pick-up and delivery kind of thing, which is also not very common for a Stefan Feld game. That's something I like about him. I mean, he's every now and then reinventing what he is doing, and is not basically republishing the same game over and over again with whatever another theme around this. So that's definitely something I definitely do appreciate. And yeah, that's pretty much the Oracle of Delphi by Stefan Feld. Yeah, and let's see what's next. Up next is a heavy box, Aventuria, the adventure card game. I believe that's the proper English title for this game. Obviously looking at a lot of German versions of games I'm showing you, but doesn't really matter too much. This card game is set in the world of I think it's the Dark Eye. In the English one, basically a role-playing game. In Germany, a very popular one, was pretty much designed to be the counterpart of D&D, which at that time you didn't really get a lot of stuff here in Germany. And yeah, back then I think it was Schmidt Spiele who then basically worked with the designers and said, okay, let's do an RPG that's somewhat close to D&D, but different in that respect that in Das Schwarze Auge, the Dark Eye, low results are typically better. That's basically the main difference in these. Yes, of course, with later iterations of the rule, things got way more complicated. And as of today, it's really a very unique game or gaming system on its own. A couple of years back, Lukas Sach, I believe, then said, okay, let's do, and Michael Palm, decided it would be time to look into a card game basically based on the role-playing experience and also putting in some role-playing aspects into a replayable card game. And it's like Warhammer Quest, for example, or Lord of the Rings, all these kind of things where you can typically play those scenarios over and over again, because the way which heroes you're approaching it with, monsters you are experiencing, it's really a very unique experience each time you play. And there is really not a lot of narrative that could be spoiled to you. And Aventuria did this thing very properly. There was, I believe, was it a Kickstarter? It was a crowdfunding campaign originally. And then I think they normally published it. There were also some iterations. I think this is now the 3rd edition or so, which has a lot of tweaks and things done to it. There is a ton of extra stuff out there, which is right. The box is really heavy. There's a lot in this base box here, and I think not even enough, because all those live wheels, for example, I had to put into another box, something that you have to buy individually, or they're not part of the core game anymore. But again, it comes with a ton of scenarios, larger scenarios that are typically spanning, 3 chapters or 3 major fights, and the fights are the meat of this game then, where you have then to do whatever, fighting against Goblin King, for example. But they're also not forgetting about the RPG aspect. In these scenarios of fights, you're usually not just fighting, you're also trying to achieve something. Though in the very first core adventure here, which I also covered on my channel using Tabletop Simulator, I believe, you're trying to guess the name of a kobold in order to make him vulnerable, for example. And this is pretty much a reference to the very first group adventure that the Black Eye has ever released, where you are trying to rescue a prisoner from a dungeon, and you're then also ultimately in the end facing this kobold to guess his name, for example. Really nicely done, and you will encounter these old school kind of adventures also in this card game. So they also did a great job taking those very original traditional RPG or the Black Eye adventures and forming this into much smaller pieces here, so that you can easily play a full adventure doing one game night. I think if you're playing a 3-stage adventure, you still need to factor in, 2 hours or so, but it's definitely manageable within one evening. Artwork is amazing in this game. I like it a lot. A lot of flair, especially if you, like me, are a fan of the Dark Eye, then this game is most certainly for you. And really a pity that it's somewhat flying under the radar. There is an English version of the game. I think it doesn't really have all of the expansions, which might be one of the reasons why this game is flying somewhat low. But maybe the designers are working on that. It's still relatively successful here in Germany, I would say, but I'm pretty sure it could do much better and would deserve much more love. And yeah, that's pretty much Aventuria. And then there is the XFiles, which for whatever reason is also not very popular. I'm not sure how well it's sold, but it was on the market only for a relatively short amount of time. There is one expansion, which of course I do own. And I'm also surprised that it doesn't get more love. I mean, it's designed by Kevin Wilson, a pretty established designer in my book. And I really do like this game. The one problem I see with this game is it's that it's a one versus many kind of game. So one is taking over the syndicate player or the syndicate playing against the agents. There is an, not official, there is an unofficial, let's say, solo co-op variant out there, which I started to play on my channel. Also for this playthrough, there wasn't a great interest in me playing this game, but also a game I introduced to quite a few folks and everyone seemed to like it. Artwork wise, okay, it's very, it's not the greatest thing out in on the world. It's very thematic because it's focusing a lot on the individual episodes of the X-Files. I think in the core game you're doing seasons 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, I don't know. And then I think with the expansion they're advancing accordingly. Problem with the expansion, you also cannot simply mix and match every little piece of components. You really have to then focus on this set of episodes versus this set of episodes. But still, it offers you a big deal of replayability, even though the core game as it is comes with a ton of cards, ton of episodes, tons of cases which you have to go through. So I don't think that you will get bored by it. I played this game maybe, I don't know, 6-7 times or so. Not really that often, but you know, time is currently the problem, and with new board game releases happening on a daily basis now, it's really tough getting this on the table. And also, not everyone likes these kind of team games, especially the one versus many kind of mode, because what I'm ending up with, because I own the game, I know the rules, I'm typically the syndicate player, and yeah, it's okay for me. I also typically used to be the dungeon master in my RPG days, not every time, but very often. So I'm okay with running this game. And here I'm also okay losing a game. I don't need to crush my opponent. Of course, I want to give them a challenge, of course, and I'm not sad if I win this game, but I'm also not the one who's then really pushing very hard to demotivate my fellow players here. And yeah, that's pretty much X-Files. I mean, it has a very great theme underneath it. I mean, the X-Files was pretty popular back in the day, and I think it still holds up pretty well. I started to rewatch some of the episodes just recently, and I think most of them are still pretty cool, actually, which is one of the reasons why I think I may want to revisit the board game here rather sooner than later. And yeah, that's pretty much the X-Files. And then it's time for another very thematic game, and that's Sons of Anarchy. Of course, also based on the TV show, which I watched, I think, at least 3 times. I'm a big fan of it. For whatever reason, this game fell relatively flat for a lot of folks. At least I think in respect to how much copies have been sold. I really don't know what it is, because I still firmly believe the show was very, very successful. Maybe, I mean, of course, it has a very violent theme, obviously. I mean, you are having guns, you even have little miniatures for the guns, you have contraband, which in the show is obviously drugs in most of the cases. You do a lot of pile-ups, so you're fighting a lot, but this game doesn't really show these kind of things to you. I think the designers already try to make sure that this game is not showing too much actual footage from the TV show, which is pretty brutal and gruesome at times. But these things are mainly left out of the board games. Yes, you do see some of the original locations, like the Cara studios, for example. So maybe, and I could imagine that this is one of the reasons why maybe this game was not as successful as it should be, because from a gameplay perspective, this game is simply amazing. A lot of area control, a lot of kind of little things that you can do pre-trail about. It's very simple rules. I mean, it's a Gale Force 9 game. Typically, they are not overly complicated. I'm a huge fan of Gale Force 9, in case you didn't know that. And this is really a game I played tons of times. Core game was playable from 3 to 4 players, I believe. Yeah, with 2 it doesn't really make sense. With some of the expansions, and unfortunately there were only expansions for more motorcycle clubs in here, but this then allowed you to play this game easily up to 6 players, for example, which I never did. So I would say with 4 players that's cool, 5 players is good too, and then you really have a lot going on the map, because this is really something you want to make sure that you're getting a lot into conflict. So with 3 players, typical problem is someone is finding a niche somewhere and exploiting that niche, whereas the other 2 are fighting against each other. Then until they realize, oh, there's someone in the lead, it's usually already too late. So I really think that's a 4-player game, maybe a 5-player game. I think they re-released the same mechanics with, was it D&D kind of background in the end? I think so. This game, I believe from what I can tell, felt totally flat, but I can only understand. There were a lot of complaints by owners of the Sons of Anarchy board game, which whatever intermittently sold for $10 or so, or $20, and that yeah, they would never play the D&D version one. I mean, it also fits the theme with some of the betrayal, like controlling those, like Lords of Waterdeep, for example. But I really think they really designed a great game with a great theme in my book. Why should we do these things again? It's the same thing like Unfathomable and Battlestar Galactica. BSG was and is still great. Yeah, everyone was hoping for a reprint. Now you get this in an H.P. Lovecraft universe. I also did a video on that. Not so sure if this will be the very same experience. But with that being said, huge fan of Sons of Anarchy, played it a ton of times. I really would have hoped that it sold a little bit better, so we would see more and more expansion. I think there's even one entry, The Luck of the Irish, on the Geek, which in my mind is the weakest season of Sons of Anarchy, when they're traveling to Ireland actually, but that's only me. But I was really hoping for some more location, even though the game already comes with a lot of replayability. So you will have a very random setup in respect to the location, and also these opportunity cards or anarchy cards. So it never got boring so far. You always have whatever this kind of random setup where things will always reveal at different times during a gameplay. So yeah, it definitely already comes with a ton of replayability right off the bat. And yeah, that's Sons of Anarchy. Then let's remain at Gale Force 9 and have a look at Homeland, the game. Also a great show. I think there was only one season which I didn't particularly like, and that's the Berlin season. The season that came afterwards was amazing. So I was also very intrigued that GF9, who again are well known for their thematic games, announced that they're doing Homeland, the game. So I did get myself a copy relatively early on. I also did a video on the rules. I believe also not a playthrough, because again, doesn't really make sense. It's kind of a game like Battlestar Galactica, because you do have a traitor in this game. So overall you have 3 different roles in this game, how you can score your points. It plays very fast. So I guess 90 minutes is typically what you are looking at, even if you're playing at the higher player counts here. And you really need to play this with higher player counts. I must say, so far I always won. No matter which role I played. Again, I played it 7-8 times or so. I'm far less successful when playing Battlestar Galactica, but for whatever reason I'm rather successful here at Homeland. Maybe that's the reason why I like it, I don't know. But it's really great fun, it's very thematic. You can also play it if someone doesn't know the show. Yes, all of those characters are appearing, but yeah, they come with some special abilities. But you can always sell this, hey, you are a spy and you're running for the CIA, Homeland Security here. Here you are, I don't know, this terrorist mole who is then trying to mess with the agent, with the cases here. And yeah, a lot of things that have made it into the game. There are no expansions as far as I know. I'm pretty sure they could have added a ton of stuff in here too, but also like Sons of Anarchy, the base game alone comes with a ton of stuff. And that's really something that you can tell about GF9. When they are publishing a game, a base game, it's typically a complete game. So you're not playing this game once or twice and already asking for expansions desperately, like Eldritch Horror, for example. It's great fun when you play it once. You will already start noticing cards that you have seen before. When you start playing it for the second or third time, you say, okay, I have seen all these cards now, I need more. And this is, of course, fixed with tons of expansions that are out there, but they also don't come cheap, obviously. And this is really, which I like about Gale Force 9, when they are publishing a game, it's really a complete game on its own. So it doesn't really require any expansions in my mind, because it comes with a ton of stuff. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say about Homeland, the game. Really a pity that it was flying under the radar. Also introduced it to a lot of folks. Everyone liked it, especially because most of the people were able to relate this to the show, but they also said, okay, wow, it's much faster than Battlestar Galactica, which typically worked. I think we managed to play this game even twice on a standard game night without running into whatever very late hours that is. And yeah, again, that's pretty much Homeland, the game. Then there is another traitor kind of game, which is New Angelus. Of course, set in the world of Android, and Netrunner was, I think, one of the most successful games that Fantasy Flight ever had. Basically a living card game. I think the fans were shocked when they decided to pretty much stop the series. Back then, I think New Angelus started also as a successor of Battlestar Galactica, and everyone was excited. Wow, we have a BSG kind of game set in the Android world, so I really must have that. And then it came out and people started to play that, and then it got quiet relatively soon. I played this game personally 4 or 5 times or so. Also, everyone liked it. It's a very long game, similar to Battlestar Galactica. When you play with 6 players, I think 4 hours is the minimum here, but also of course depends a little bit on your group. I'm totally okay having a lot of suspicion, table talk at the table, especially playing a game like this. It also suffers from the standard Fantasy Flight kind of problem. It's not really, how to put it, a complete game. Yes, you can play it relatively easily without running into problems, but all those, I think, skill cards they're also referred to here, like in Battlestar Galactica, that's pretty much the same thing, are very much limited from the base board. Like in Battlestar Galactica, I think in each of the decks you have 2 or 3 different kind of cards actually, so you're not really surprising that's the same here, which is, I would say, for Battlestar Galactica you definitely do need an expansion or 2 to really maximize the fun you can have with the game. And I think that's the same with New Angelus here. For a long time I thought it to be dead, but very recently, for whatever reason, FFG posted something on their Facebook page. I think you could win a copy. And I basically replied to that comment saying, I'm not interested in winning a copy because I do own the game. I would be interested to say, does it mean we are finally seeing an expansion? I didn't really check that out yet, if there is something. I checked the BGG entry a couple of days ago. Didn't really see anything. Maybe that has changed in the meantime, but this is really one of the games I would continue to play. But I think, I mean, yeah, if I would introduce it now, I mean, last time I played it is easily 2 years ago or so, maybe even longer than that, I don't know. So I would be okay playing with the core components, but then I know for sure that during this first play after these 2 years, I would remember all these cards. Yet if playing it with new people, they would be also new to this, so they would be okay. But again, typically the immediate feedback I got from players who played it for the second time said, okay, hey, we need more stuff in this game, more variety in respect to some of those skill cards here, for example. But again, still a great fun, and for whatever reason, I really hope that FFG may have not yet abandoned this entirely, so let's see what the future brings. I would be more looking forward to an expansion of New Angelus than really for this whole Unfathomable thing. That's only my thought on things. And yeah, it seems I really do have a lot of hate towards Unfathomable. That's not it. I'm really not hating this game in any way. I simply couldn't care less about this game. I'm totally fine if you will enjoy the game, and if that's fine for you, that's totally fine. I will not spoil it with you. I would even play it if someone would bring it to the table, actually. But again, I wouldn't get myself a copy because I do have BSG. I have a lot of friends who have all the BSG stuff. I have this New Angelus. I have Homeland. So I'm really covered in traitor-based kind of games. And yeah, that's New Angelus. Even the next game comes with, I would say, a semi-cooperative version, and that's Castaways. And the German title is Naufragos. I believe that's the Spanish word, pretty much means the same thing as Castaways. Could be completely wrong right now. But it's also thematically close to Robinson Crusoe. I believe it even was published around the same time as Robinson Crusoe back then. So it seems there was a hype for these Castaway kind of games. Not sure if this was tied to the Tom Hanks movies, by the way. I don't know, but in this game you're also kind of trying to survive, make it off the island. It doesn't come with a ton of scenarios like Robinson Crusoe. Again, it's also not a cooperative game. It's kind of a competitive game with some, again, it's semi-cooperative. So you can really lose altogether or you can partially win. And for me, it really works. I know a lot of people have problems with semi-cooperative things, but that depends a little bit on who you are playing with. So there are folks out there, apparently, who are simply being very mean and being a dick, quote unquote, saying, okay, if I can win, you won't win. But I think that's part of the story, and you have to, if you accept this game for what it is, then you are totally fine, because the way how you get there, I mean, this is really more or less a worker placement game to some extent, with a lot of resource management, but it also comes with a ton of narratives, which back in the days was relatively new, that you have a Euro kind of game with, I don't know, event cards that you are triggering that will do stuff to you, depending on some of your decisions. So I think it really did a lot of things correctly. I also played it a couple of times. With couple, I mean more than two actually. And usually all the players I introduced this game to were kind of, yeah, I really enjoyed this game. The only exceptions are then again folks who don't necessarily enjoy semi-cooperative games. But again, for me that does work. That's okay by me. But give you an example. I think there was this game Robin Hood and the Merry Man, and I think I also covered this on my channel with a solo mode, and we played it here. I think it was really a full 5-player game as far as I remember, and there was a good friend of mine, and she played this game extremely well. She was really ahead in respect to the points and whatnot, but what she then really forgot was that this game is also semi-cooperative. So if she doesn't pay attention, everyone will lose. And she basically went, I think it was one of the final rounds or so where I went into, and she was sure she was winning this game, and then we basically lost the game altogether, and she was shocked. Wow, okay, yeah, I totally forgot about it, but what a stupid game. Hey, I was winning, what's going on? I tried to explain, yeah, but that's what semi-cooperative means. At some point in time, you have to let loose of your personal goal and maybe focus on the greater good here, so that you're not all losing, so that you can still win this game, but you have to refocus at some point in time. And that's difficult, especially when you're playing a game for the first time, for example. I totally get that. But this is usually when you introduce someone to a game and they don't enjoy the game, they will not play this again, so at least most cases. And that's no different here too, I think. So it can fail relatively soon for you, and then you will most likely not play the game, because it's also not a very short game. I think, yeah, when playing this with 4 players, it's also easily 3 hours, maybe a little bit more than that. And then if you're not enjoying a game for 3 hours, yeah, that's bad, obviously. But yeah, for me, I really enjoyed it, and I still do. Something I pick up every other year or so right now. So I always tend to say I'm playing it then with my family who know this game, so that's okay. They do remember. So again, every now and then we are playing this game. Maybe it's once a year, and we are still enjoying this game a big deal. But then it's also okay to let it rest for a couple of months and then maybe revisit it. This is really a game where you want to experience the stuff, and after a year you usually forget what you have read. So always surprised about what's going on the island here. And yeah, that's Naufragos Castaways. And last but definitely not least, we have Francis Drake, designed by Peter Horse, who also did games like Royals and Heads of State, which was basically the predecessor to Royals. And Royals is the ultimately streamlined version of Heads of State. Heads of State also came with a lot of strange artwork. I believe he was using Kickstarter backers' images, and the game was in some respect overly complicated, which he totally fixed with the Royals version of the game, which then again is great fun to play. So I played them both, Heads of State and Royals also a lot of times actually. Maybe Royals is a little bit too polished for my taste, but it's still great fun and great introductory game for, let's say, somewhat it's newer players, or maybe not the first game you should play after you have played Monopoly and Risk and Catan, but could come relatively soon thereafter, similar to Carcassonne, I would say, whereas Carcassonne, maybe the core game is even a little bit simpler than that. But enough said about Royals. We are talking about Francis Drake here. It's not a traitor game, it's a straight up Euro kind of game, which comes with a very cool action selection. Yeah, I think resource gathering things, so all about timing. Then you also, it's very important doing timing to get some of these galleons, finding the proper treasure, and depending on how soon you leave, you will get first dibs on some of the things. So this game does a lot of things correctly, actually. Again, I'm enjoying this game a big deal, and also everyone I introduced it to really liked it, but also didn't really get a lot of traction out there on the market. There is even a box of expansions which you're adding in there, but doesn't really, or they don't really do a lot of things to the game. It stays a relatively straightforward game as it is. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the theme. I mean, you know, I'm a big fan of pirates and these kind of themes. And yeah, depending on who you ask, you would say Francis Drake was not a pirate or he was a pirate. That's history. And there are definitely way more knowledgeable people out there who can make up their opinion. There was a great movie I liked as a kid with Rob Taylor, Francis Drake. I think it had a different name back then. Can't remember which one, but it was a great fun movie back then. I'm pretty sure it didn't age that well, but I might be willing to give it another try if I find it on some of the streaming providers out there. Maybe I have to check that later on, actually. Maybe introduce it to my kid or so. And yeah, that's pretty much my top 10 list of games which I feel are somewhat flying under the radar, are forgotten, are somewhat obscure. I think I don't have a lot of obscure games out there, at least on my list. I think there are straight up games that didn't really sell particularly well, were forgotten easily. Maybe they were published at the wrong time. I don't know what happens to them. Maybe the theme was not for everyone. Could have a lot of reasons why these games didn't sell as I think they should have sold actually. Again, that's my opinion on some of the things. I would be really curious to hear your thoughts on game, where you think this is a game that really should get more attention, more traction, more love out there. Maybe you send me a video response and we can do a little back and forth. Let's see what happens. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed my little top 10 list today. Before you are allowed to leave. Huge shout out to all of my patrons and channel members. Really do appreciate all your support, and yes, really hope to see you soon in one of my other videos. And until then, bye bye.